Welcome to the Paleo Post Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Chaggy, founder of the world of paleoanthropology. Join us as we journey through time to uncover the secrets of human evolution. Each episode, we delve into the groundbreaking discoveries, fascinating research, and the stories of our ancient ancestors. From the latest fossil finds to in-depth discussions with leading experts, the Paleo Post Podcast brings the past to life. Whether you're a seasoned researcher or just curious about where we come from, there's something here for everyone. So let's explore our incredible human origins together. Well, guys, here we are, the Paleo Post Podcast. We did it. We are here on season 3, and I am so excited that I'm here with not one, but 2 co-hosts. We have Genevieve von Pettinger from season 1, and we have Dr. George Nash from season 2, and we are all here for season 3, and we are going to have an absolute blast. Guys, how are you? I will ask ladies first. Genevieve, how are you? What's new with you?
I'm so well. Oh my gosh. So I just finished doing because I like to be a bit of a globetrotter. So I just finished a series online, which I posted of my recent sort of initial survey work in the magnificent Kingdom of Jordan, which was incredibly fun. My kids were along for the ride, as you will see. In the last video, I posted a few photos, including a video with my kids in the back of the truck. So don't call anybody; they were safe, I swear. I was normally back there with them too. It's how you roll in the Middle East, right? So it was really fun. It was lovely to all the positive feedback to get from it, which was people are always asking, George, you probably get this too, right? Like, what's it like to be in the field? What's it like to do field work? And it's basically a grown-up treasure hunt. If you're doing it right, it's just a lot of fun. And right. And you have all your clues and you figure stuff out. And it was just a wonderful time because I had a couple months to do it, so it wasn't rushed. Like it was, and I was working with George was supposed to be there with me, but poor George got COVID. So I'm so bad, George. He was supposed to be there with me. So I ended up next time you gotta be there. But that's where I gave him a couple shouts out, like in was it episode 7? Was the G&G cave? So that was the cave George and I had actually found together the year before that I went back to. But it was so fun to just literally be, here I am, this is what I'm doing, and it was lovely, the comments, people sort of saying thank you for sharing, it was really fun to come along for the ride. So I think I'll definitely do it again. That was a lot of fun, it was easy to do, and I really think that, for all of us, this is why we do outreach, right? Which is that it should be open to everybody because this is our collective heritage. So it was really fun. Also, huge shout out to the Bedouins. So who were, just all absolutely amazing, and all my different colleagues and contacts, and also got a chance to work on my Arabic. So that was really fun too. It was a good time all around. But now I'm back and doing writing stuff and other sort of the more sedentary side, right? Because you're either like Indiana Genevieve, or else I'm like, sort of got my glasses on and I'm like sitting there doing data entry. So it's like these big extremes, right? But that's what makes it so fun. So there we go. That's where I was. Now I'm back, and more adventures are coming. So I'm doing very well. So off to you, George, since I blabbered on for way too long.
Where do I start? Well, I'll start from the present and work backwards. So for the last 2 weeks, I've just been finishing a book off, 388 pages of a book called Megaliths in Wales. It's a massive, massive book.
Wow.
And it just, but what's been lovely, both of you, is that the initial research I did about 13 years ago, and but the publisher said, "Oi, Nash, you cannot use slides or negative film. We need digital film only." So it actually taught me to go back out there again, take the photographs digitally, and by doing so, I learned a lot more about landscape, about the position of certain stones, orientations, the history of the archaeology. So it was a really good practice for me to go back and look at the sites. And incidentally, that's an interesting thing, because one of the things I'll be looking at today is this Indonesian project, which is all about looking back at your original dates, but I'll come to that a little bit later on. So that's one thing. I've just finished a chapter for a book with a colleague of mine, Davida Degan from Israel. We're doing a book. Yeah, we're doing a chapter on the Negev rock art, as per usual. That's been great fun, because it's been good to go back through some slides which I took about 4 or 5 years ago, and choose them and also help write the paper. And then, this is where it's been really exciting, is that myself and my son, we've been out prospecting for rock art in areas of the landscape that were south of the glacial maximum 20,000 years ago in England and Wales. And guess what? We found it. We found some stuff.
Of course you did. Congratulations. That's fantastic.
So as that's something I'm happy to talk about a little bit later on in detail. But basically, fantastic cave. And myself, Sarah, and Polly from the First Art team, and Ugo from the First Art team, and Virginia as well, we all went to this one cave where we'd found art. I thought it was Christian art, but actually Polly, with his super-duper skills on D-stretch, worked out it was the first schematic painted rock art we have in northwestern Europe. So fantastic. So that and the dreaded Rising Star, which is coming up next week. I'm busy.
No kidding, hey? So, that's amazing. Well, huge congrats on all this. It's also so interesting to see how revisiting things especially for the stuff that's 30 years later. I mean, you've accumulated so much wisdom and knowledge and just seen so many more sites. I bet you it's changed the glasses a little bit within which you look at it, so to speak, the lens.
I actually think the stuff that we do, and that's applied to all three of us, is the learning curve. You know, if you said to me, I'm 62 something at the moment, and I'm still learning, for God's sake. You know, I mean, I've got my my status at 2 universities, but I'm happy to admit that I've made mistakes. I've probably gone down the wrong path and published those wrong paths, but I'm still learning. I'm still on that learning curve, finding more information about where we come from, for example. And it is exciting, even for a man of my age. You know, I mean, if I wish I had the knowledge now that I had that I could take back to when I was, say, 21, 22. But alas, that's not the case, because I was too busy drinking beer. That's my problem.
That's so funny. But no, I mean, I think the whole point of science is that we put forward theories based on the information we have around us. I mean, I certainly think with rock art in particular, I mean, think about the fact that they used to think everything was made by the Celts, right? Like they thought, like if you go back to the 1800s, they thought everything was from the Celts, and that was the oldest time period that existed, and then to sort of see it moving forward. And I feel like with every sort of generation of archaeologists and paleoanthropologists moving forward, it's like they're getting to build on all the knowledge that the generations before accumulated. And it was always like, well, carbon dating. Before carbon dating, they didn't know how old things were. Then they get carbon dating. And then carbon dating has a ceiling, though, so nobody knows if anything's older than 40-ish thousand years old. Suddenly, uranium series. Like, so again, I think failure is good. It's part of science, right? And so and I mean that in a nice way, which is you're just like, you regroup and you're like, well, I guess I didn't have that one, right? And then you just go figure out a new one. So I think the big thing is just not getting too entrenched or being too ego driven with what happens. So I'm always open to being delightfully surprised.
I whisper to all of you that there are still a few people who are entrenched in their positions.
Yeah.
And I think it's far better and far more honest to think about, well, yeah, I should look at this in a different way. And I can do that quite easily with some of the things that I've looked at. But I've never stood a position without the idea that it can be changed. And that's what, I suppose kept me kept myself happy, but it's also kept a lot of other people happy that I'm forever updating, a particular theme within the work that I'm working in.
It's wonderful. It's what we're here for.
And, as far as I go and my news, I only had a baby and everything, but that's,
Yay! Tiny Homo sapiens!
just a new Homo sapiens on the planet, that's all.
Yep.
But, in all honesty, there's been a lot going on, and I've been doing a lot of work on the world of paleoanthropology, and, I'm really excited because there's a lot of new things that we're going to be bringing to our audience, new content, new features, bringing in a lot more people to help out, get a lot more ideas coming. One thing that's coming up that I'm really excited about is there was a new paper. I don't know if you guys heard about Homo naledi. Yeah, a little controversial, Homo naledi. I don't know if you guys know that about Homo naledi, but supposedly they buried their dead. A lot of people don't really agree with that, and there's a lot of good reason for that, for whichever side you're on. But these individuals have a paper that was published, and I'm going to be having the 3 authors of this paper on the next episode of The Story of Us in August. And so that's some big WOPA news coming out. We're going to be expanding. I'm hoping to go to some classrooms to do some lectures and some teaching, and we're going to have a lot of fun. So if you're already a fan of the world of paleoanthropology, stick around because things are just getting started. And if you're new and this is the first time you're listening to this podcast and you're just hearing us ramble on about our updates, please bear with us because we are just telling our fans everything that's happened to us over the last few months, catching everyone up, and we are just now going to get into the news about everything that is so exciting about anthropology, paleoanthropology, and archaeology, and that is going to start right now. And we are going to start that story with big news out of Spain, out of a site called Atapuerca, which is home to one of, if not the oldest human ancestor in Europe, Homo antecessor, which was living there around about 1 million years ago, 850,000 years ago is where they found these fossils. And this is a team of over 100 people that was working on this site over the last few years. They recovered new fossils, an extremely well-preserved tooth that possibly we could get DNA or other paleogenomic information from. So this is a huge find for us. And it's important to understand when I say human ancestor, that doesn't mean they were a direct ancestor. We were not living in Europe for the last 850,000 years. There were multiple migrations of species from Africa into Europe that died for various reasons. We actually think Homo antecessor went extinct due to climatic changes, and there was a gap of about 200,000 years of no population in Europe, and so we see either Homo heidelbergensis or basal Neanderthals, whichever you want to call them, kind of flow into the area. So, very interesting find. I'm also going to be having people on from that find on the show to talk about that because it is very important, because the more we learn about our older ancestors, the more we can learn about the interconnectedness between us, Denisovans, Neanderthals, how we're all related, how we interbred, and answer some of these big questions about genetic flow, migration, and really how we got here. I mean, what do you guys think about this find? Do you think we can actually get any DNA from this tooth that they found?
We dabble in paleogenomics over in our area, and so I think to the best of my knowledge, I mean, we've gone back. There was that skull in Africa that was 2 million years old that they were able to do some protein work with. So there we go. So we're in the right ballpark now. We got the 2 million year old.
It was a Paranthropus, yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So there we go. Thank you. And we've got the Heidelbergensis also in that Atapuerca area from Cima de los Huesos. Those are the guys that, to the best of my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, but those are the oldest actually genetic sequencing in the world come from those guys. And it was around 420,000. And they said it was right around the time of the split of Neanderthals and Denisovans, if I remember correctly. Like, I think that was what they were saying, was they gave them a better sense of how and when that split took place. So that, I believe, was actual genetics, not just the
Interestingly enough about that. So I heard that as well. I heard that as well. And then a recent paper came out saying that 250,000-year-old Denisovan DNA that was sequenced was the oldest human DNA sequence that we found. And I went back to find that other paper, and it was gone. So, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, because to the best of I'm trying to think, because I mean, the team who did it, I don't think I saw it. Was it retracted?
I think
it
was.
What year?
I don't know. I don't know. I just couldn't find it again.
Yeah, because I think I saw it a couple years ago. Was the last time I saw that paper. Because I was referencing it for something. But I believe so. I think wherever we are, somewhere in there, I'd say 300, 400,000-ish is probably the oldest where they've actually managed to rebuild genetic material from fossil remains, basically, right? So, but at the same time, teeth are incredibly good preservers, fantastic preservers, because of that hard enamel coating. They're often seen to be almost like, it's almost the holy grail, like, if you have a tooth, you've got everything, right? Because you can also do the ESR dating on it. So
people don't realize what you can do with teeth. You can find out diet, what they ate, how long they lived, where they lived, everything, almost everything.
They're from little tiny time capsules of archaeology.
Yeah, they are. It's insane, and that's why it's so critical that they found this tooth that is just so well preserved, which I will include in this video. So hopefully, while I'm talking right now, you're looking at it. If I've edited this correctly, you will be looking at this tooth right now. If you're listening to this podcast, because this, of course, is a podcast as well as a video, you can go to my website and view the tooth there, because I wrote an article on this as well.
Yeah. So
moving on.
George, sir, George had a thought.
George, what was your thought on this?
It's just that we have a Heidelbergensis actually in the UK as well. What we would call the famous Boxgrove site, where a tibia was found. Now, I think it was looked at, but this was 25, 30 years ago, and I suspect that it's lurking in some sort of archive in Oxford or in the British Museum. But there is a potential there to do some really good paleogenetics on that piece of bone. It was in very, very good condition, but it was the only bone to come out of Boxgrove which had that ancestral link to Heidelbergensis on it. So again, I know very little about that area of paleogenetics, but it would be a very, very good piece to look at.
Absolutely. Yeah. And paleogenetics, I mean, genomics in general. And that's the thing, to clarify, genetics is when we're looking at genes, individual genes. Genomics is when we're looking at genomes, which is the entire set of an individual's genes.
Yeah.
So when we're talking genomes, we're talking the Neanderthal genome. So their entire, what all their chromosomes look like, what everything looks like. So we're getting into paleogenomics now, where we're actually able to rebuild entire genomes, and that's just absolutely fascinating, and something that only technology, as it advances, will allow us to further continue our advancements.
Yeah. So, in case the viewers don't know, over time, genetic material fragments, and it gets more. It gets into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. So it's these tiny. It's like a really complicated microscopic puzzle, basically. And so I think a lot of it has been, and this is where they use what's called reference libraries. So what they're doing is they have the genomes for Neanderthals, they have genomes for humans, like they have all these different genomes, and then what they're looking for is little puzzle sets that match, that they can line up with the reference material that they know already exists. And so this is where artificial intelligence, machine learning, all that pattern recognition, I think is really going to open the door to being able to work with smaller and smaller fragments, and figuring out how those piece back together and which genome sets do they match, because of course chromosomes are in certain orders in certain individuals and in certain species, and so matching up the order of chromosomes and things like that, it's those minute little, it's like a million piece puzzle but on a microscopic scale. It's really cool stuff. I love it.
Absolutely. It's, yeah. So, there's been so much news in this field. Why don't we move on to another story that we have, which Genevieve is going to take the lead on, because it is as probably, well, I don't know. We have two rock art experts here.
Well,
it could be anyone's guess.
Well, can I transition from Boxgrove to the story I'm going to bring, and then we'll move to George and the story. I mean, they're all really exciting, but my little rock heart gets happy. But I'm letting George take the lead on that one because he knows more. So I just wanted to briefly note.
That's right. I forgot. You're right. Because of a reason. Because of a reason he'll tell us.
George is our pro on that one. Okay, I wanted to, but this segues super nicely with the whole Boxgrove comment from George, which was that Boxgrove, of course, has a couple of hand axes. So these are these large, really well-shaped hand axes from what are called like the Acheulean hand axes. So it's kind of a middle Stone Age kind of time period, middle to late, middle to old, sort of somewhere in there. These ones had some fossils centered in some of the hand axes, which fascinates me because there is no practical utilitarian reason to center a fossil. Like, that sounds like there's some sort of aesthetic quality taking place here of, ooh, I like the spirally little thing, I'm going to build my tool around it. So I feel like, for people who maybe don't know that much about archaeology this far back, we don't have a lot to work with. We don't have pyramids. We don't have like, we're literally trying to rebuild worlds using stone tools and pieces of skulls and little bits of paint around the world. So what we spend a lot of time doing is what I would call like making indirect inferences. So we're having to infer things. So when we see a change in archaeology, so if they're doing certain things for a long time all the same way, and then suddenly something changes, like say the type of stone tools they're making, that is the kind of little signal we're looking for in the archaeological record. Like, ooh, maybe something's changed in their brains. Maybe something's changed in their culture. Maybe there's some new thing. Maybe environmental conditions have changed things. So we're rebuilding stories from really tiny clues. And I think that's what I wanted to just flag with this particular story. It was from June. So let me get the exact information, make sure I'm being very correct here. So what it was a study. Was this out of ASU? Is that what you were saying to me, Seth?
Yes, it is. It's out of School of Human Evolution and Social Change.
Arizona State. Yes, so there you go. And so what it's talking about is, over 3 million years of stone tool complexity suggests that cumulative culture began during the Middle Pleistocene. So basically what they're saying is that hominins, maybe even Australopithecus, because of course Australopithecines is back at 3 million plus. So our hominid big family have been using rocks with sharp edges for 3 million plus years. But what the study looked at was, is there a point where complexity suddenly increases? And what they found was that starting around 600,000 years ago, there seems to be a bigger jump to the complexity of the tools. And they make the argument, again, that in order to have that complexity jump, there must have been some sort of collective culture. So that tool making was part of their culture. I would argue, too, that language might be an important piece in this, because what they did was they were comparing to primates and other tool making creatures, because, again, we're not the only ones who do it. And honestly, watching a capuchin make a stone tool is terrifying because they're little. I can't imagine them taking over the world. It would be so scary. They would totally take out the Homo sapiens in a heartbeat. So it's a good thing they haven't come together yet. But that sort of idea of these more complex tools, and Boxgrove fits in with that, which the idea of making these absolutely symmetrical, aesthetically pleasing hand axes that are shaped on all sides. Like these are a very different tool than that rock with a sharp cutting edge. And so and this has always been from the time I was an undergraduate, that's always kind of been this argument for the almost like almost like a shift that takes place cognitively, maybe, and again, it could match with species as species are evolving, changes are taking place, but that idea that greater complexity is happening. And so that complexity then requires a culture to share it, maintain it, pass it on to future generations, which interestingly, and I'll finish with that thought because I want you guys to have a chance to speak about it as well, is the work I have been doing lately has really been making me think that the origins of graphic mark making and symbolic thought go back farther in the landscape. Like we'll go farther back, sorry, in the archaeological record than we had previously thought. And it's interesting that my guess would have been somewhere around 500,000-600,000 years ago, and that's just a guess. There'd be lots of people who don't agree with me, but my thought was that it was actually a common ancestor of Neanderthal, Denisovan, human. Who knows how Naledi fits into all this? But like that idea that it's not just Homo sapiens making marks, but that mark making is a much older, broader tradition amongst hominins. And so I think that that's where I'm intrigued to see this shift point around 600,000 towards a more cumulative, collective cultural activity, because that may, again, using that idea of looking for clues, that might flag some sort of brain development in a new way, some new level of cognition, some new neural pathways around symbolism, which could also give us clues that this may be, those activities may have also have something to do with the origins of mark making as well, because those are also bigger brain potentially activities. But again, with Naledi, I think that that opens up some interesting stuff, but certainly the wiring may have changed, not just brain size, but also wiring changes. So now I'm going to stop talking and let you guys have your say.
Well, I'll add with the Boxgrove site. The Boxgrove site is between 400 and 600,000 years ago, and so it fits within that nice time scale. And the two things that I would add to your discussion, Jen, is the idea of symmetry. So we're going from a chopping tool which has no sort of form at all to a symmetrical tool that what you do on the left, you do on the right. So that's really interesting, because if you get one of those tools from Boxgrove or anywhere else from that time period and cut it in half, you'll see there's almost an exact copy on the left and right. The left and right go together. So symmetry is one. And the other thing I would add is ergonomics. So there is a hardwire thing going on, I think, at that time. And it's, I think arguably it's occurring in all those areas of the world where we're starting to find, early Middle Paleolithic or even late early Paleolithic material coming up. And you can clearly see that within the sequence, because the sequence is chopping tools which have no discernible form whatsoever. And in fact, I'm not an expert in chopping tools from the lower Paleolithic, but I would find it difficult to try and work out what's going on in terms of the mindset. The minute you start to get this idea of symmetry and ergonomics is when you're dealing with something which is almost like us. So, just a thought.
Yeah. Luckily, the Capuchins have not figured out symmetry. But yeah, that George, you explained it perfectly. That's exactly what I was thinking too. Is it feels like something has shifted. Oh, Seth, one question for you about Homo antecessor, just for my own question, but also for the audience as well. Homo antecessor, how does it fit in with Homo erectus? What's the deal here?
So
I just opened a huge can of worms, just roughly.
Of course you opened a huge can of worms. So basically, everything that we know, every species that we know, comes from Homo erectus outside of Africa, besides Homo florenziensis and Luanzensis, because Well, originally they even thought that those were descendants of Homo erectus that island dwarfism acted on and caused them to shrink. But now we think that they were actually probably more Homo habilis that got stuck on rafts and drifted over like monkeys did to South America, because Homo florenziensis is much more similar to Homo habilis than to Homo erectus. But so anyway, Homo erectus would have made, or even earlier species or an unknown species would have made multiple migrations into Europe through Asia, and they would have bred with other species that were there, and just at some point they became Homo ancestor 850,000 years ago. They lived in this land, this area, during this period. I'm not exactly sure what the climate was like at this time in Europe 850,000 years ago. Obviously, I believe that 250,000 period gap was probably, I'm going to assume, an ice age.
There is a sort of circular or a belief that there have been since the last ice age, the Devensian, around about 9, but a colleague of mine said maybe more, major glaciations through the Pleistocene. So it's more than likely that in that period we're talking about both a warm period and a cold period over a long period of time, of course.
Right, exactly. And so that would have greatly affected Homo ancestors, which again we know went extinct because all of a sudden we have in Grandolina in Antarctica we have the fossil record, literally just stratigraphy. We have bones, nothing, nothing, different species, bones.
Aha.
And so we know they're not related.
Okay. So it's more that kind of like just at different times this was a good landscape to be in because of the caves, because of the environment. So when a new species trotted in, they went, "Hey, this looks like it's got a good view," right?
Which goes really well with Chris Stringer and his colleagues' recent out of Africa replacement hypothesis, where a species would come out, they would slowly adapt and change to the environment as they went, and then if the environment changed too quickly, they would go extinct, and a new species would come in and replace them.
Totally logical. Okay, thank you. I just wanted, just for my own sort of mental
mapping.
Of course.
Plus, I hope the listeners, of course.
Yeah.
And so I think that brings us to our final news story. Drum roll.
Such a fun one.
Not the end of the podcast.
Tell us stuff.
Last news story. George, why don't you tell us about this amazing rock art that I know is all over the news, so maybe some of our listeners have heard about it. But you had a special role in this, so why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I saw, what was interesting, I saw the paper before it was published, and Maxime Aubert, I think, is the principal investigator of the project. He's been working in Borneo and Sulawesi and other parts of the far southeast Asia in Indonesia, and many years ago that there was a big, I think around about 2018, 2019, there was news coming out that there had been a couple of caves found in Sulawesi where they had beautiful figurative rock art, mainly of pigs and hunters and hand stencils. And they got these dated, and the dates were around about 45,000. And this is where I commend Albert and his colleagues that they went back and did it again. However, when I was looking at the paper, and I saw it about 2 weeks before it got published, what was really interesting about the paper was that the panels they were looking at, there was a whole mishmash of dates in there. So there's dates of 17,000, 38,000, 45,000, and the new dates are 52,500. And my argument is, first of all, they are going down the idea that it's a narrative. And the thing is, with a narrative, as you well know, you do a narrative. If you're painting a panel and it's a single narrative, it's done as a single event. And therefore, when you do the dating on that narrative, you have a date with a date range of a plus or minus 500 years, 1,000 years, or if you're going back that sort of time period, maybe a couple of thousand years either side of the date. I can only suggest that when they were doing the sampling, that the samples are of not just the figures that you can see or the figures that they were looking at, but there's maybe paint underneath, because you have that massive range of between 17,000 and 52,000, which in my bad mathematics is about 35,000 years or thereabouts of painting, and I find that very difficult to grasp. But we have been in that position before, because again, with my work, one of my PhD projects was a site called Minatinda, which is in southern Spain, where we had 17 layers of paint. And the trouble was there was no style flow flowing over each of those layers, so you could date them chronologically and work out a sequence of dates to each painted surface. So here it's very difficult to work out what's going on. But again, you have to commend the authors of this paper. They were looking at 4 sites in southern Sulawesi, and they're within the limestone karst areas of the area, and where there's a lot of caves. And I believe, we've had a good conversation today, like we do every time, but we are on the cusp of something really very, very exciting. And I think these guys are proving that, because by looking at the original dating, and if you can improve on those dates and be honest about those dates and say, look, we got a much earlier date or earlier date sequence, then by all means publish it. And I think that's really good that they're doing that and they're not resting on their laurels. And this brings me to something which I remember as an undergraduate and as a postgraduate as well. But I remember in the UK we have a famous cave called Paviland Cave, which some of you may or may not know. And at Paviland Cave, which is on the Gower Coast in Wales, the first radiocarbon dates on that cave were done in 1964, with a date of 16,400 or thereabouts BP. And then in the 1990s, they re-looked at it, a different team looked at it, and got dates, I think, around about 29,000, and now it's 33,000. So it just gives you an idea that from the original radiocarbon dating in 1964 to now, there's a difference of 16,000 years which have been gained, which pushes the dates of this particular burial back much, much further than it was. So there is always room, I think, in many respects, to go back to your site, or that's if you're still passionate about it, and re-evaluate and especially if there's new science available to do what Aubert and his team have done. Again, I think it's a remarkable paper. I was asked to comment on it. That's the reason why I got to see it 2 weeks before it got published. And so I did some comments on the paper. And in many respects, my congratulations goes out to the re-evaluation of it. However, what I don't understand is the massive date sequence, or the massive date range between the most recent and the most earliest painted sampling that they did. That's why I can't understand. And if it is done as a series of additions, and basically it's a hunting scene, so you'd expect the pigs and the human figures with spears and whatever and bow and arrows, you'd expect it all to be one event. But clearly from the dating sequence that we have here, that's not the case. So it isn't a narrative, or if it is a narrative, it's a narrative which is being built up over time, or they are dating earlier paint, but then you'd have to have a style flow over it in order for them to do their uranium thorium dating. And they are using a new type of uranium thorium dating, which we've actually used at Baconhole in Wales, which is what they call wet sequencing. So that's, again, quite interesting about what's going on. So, the technology is moving on, but again, I still don't understand this massive date range between 17 and 52,000.
George,
now
okay, go ahead, Seth, if you want to.
Now see, these are things we'll figure out, guys. We'll figure out these transitions on who's talking. We'll get this.
Yeah.
We'll get this. Now, I just saw this crazy article, and I didn't even open it because it just seemed a little too far-fetched. It said that potentially Homo sapiens were not the authors of that oldest rock art. Who would be then? Would it be Denisovans? Would it be who is around there at that time? Do we know? Is there any contenders?
Well, I still have the view that they're modern humans, and the reason why I say that, the reason why I say that is that because that 50,000 date is an interesting point in that I still think that we as modern humans are learning from other cousins of ours,
Right.
and that's really interesting because I think we're doing that with Neanderthals. I think we are learning from them rather than they learning from us. So there's a big spanner in the works for a start. But Denisovans, why not? But I still hold the view that modern humans, that's you and I, are still moving around. Maybe running into people like Floriensis, maybe, but I think it's more likely that the sequence we've got there, to me, looks like a single event. And if we are to accept the earlier date of 52,000, then all of it needs to be to 52,000, and maybe there's a little bit of contamination, as we would expect when we're doing multiple samples.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
I had a couple ideas about that. So first of all, I just wanted to put a shout out to Adi Octavania. Adi is a longtime collaborator of Maxime Aubert. Adi is actually the first author on this paper, and he is from Indonesia. Yeah, so I just wanted to give him a little shout out because this is technically, I mean, not that Maxime, this is his lab, this is his thing, but it's a big deal to get to be the first author. So, that's awesome that Adi got to have that role. And well deserved. He's been sending me pictures of geometric signs for years. It's like he teases me. He keeps sending me photos from the Indonesian sites and from geometric signs. I'm like, I'm coming. Oh my gosh, I want to go. Okay, so couple thoughts. First of all, I'm thinking about La Pasiaga in Spain. Seth, I'll give you a photo so you can put it up. So I'm thinking about the bison in there, George. You know the purple, that magnificent purple bison?
Yeah.
So the bison was originally done in purple, and then somebody came in about 5,000 years later and used black paint to fill in the parts that had started to wash off. So because of the color difference, it was easy to see the difference. The question I was going to ask George, I don't remember seeing it in that paper. Did anybody do any Raman work on the actual chemical composition of the paint from different figures?
I don't think they did.
I didn't think they did. Because that would help answer our question. So here's for the listeners, viewers. Okay. Paint pigments have chemical signatures because there's all the little bits and pieces that go into it, right? So it's actually has the different elements like iron oxide, or it might have bits of quartz, or it might have other like talc, like lots of different things go into it. And it's over time, these what we call paint recipes tend to change. So if we're looking at a bigger time span, you'd probably be able to see the chemical differences between what pigments were made 50,000 years ago versus pigments made 17,000. So if it's the exact same pigment recipe with the exact same composition of different minerals and elements, if it's the same, that would be a pretty good indicator that it's all from the same sort of same culture group, probably from the same narrative, versus if you've got very different pigment recipes, then that might be a good indicator that you're talking about different groups of people who either added their own bits over time or came in and maybe, again, did that La Pasiaga thing and filled some stuff in. So I think that would probably be a really helpful new technology to assess it, to take a look at that. I'm also thinking, like you, George, about how when limestone drips down the walls of the caves and makes those beautiful translucent layers, it doesn't always do it evenly. So sometimes some parts get covered up sooner than other parts do, and other parts might be left out till later, and it might just be that the at 50,000, maybe only some of the parts got covered up by drips and other parts were left out till later, and then later drips came down and did that. So I don't know, George, if that might be, that occurred to me as well as being that it could be the limitations with uranium series that we're not actually dating the paint directly, we're dating when the paint was covered. So that always kind of creates that slight issue of what if the drips didn't happen at exactly the same time. I don't know enough about the actual like specifics because there's usually the supplementary data behind it, which talks more about that. But I think that the concept, like if this, and also a style change, like it would be very unlikely that there was no style changes over 30,000 years. So I think I see what the authors are saying, and I would suspect it's probably some technological growing pains. Which, you know, do you know what I mean? Like that, and that there might be some other strands of evidence that could be brought in, like analyzing the actual pigment recipe might offer a second opinion as to whether these things really are related or not. Because yeah, if it's the same paint recipe, it's pretty much the same people. And then of course, I know with ramen now, they can even sometimes identify genetic material in saliva and things in the paint. So maybe, coming back to our paleogenetics conversation, maybe there's even some way to extract some genetic material, which would be really neat. Regarding Seth's question, I also am leaning towards Homo sapien. And I say that very specifically because to date, I have not, and again, I am absolutely firmly in the camp that other hominins were also making marks. So far, correct me if I'm wrong, George, but Homo sapien are the only ones I've seen doing figurative art. Like everybody else is making lines, maybe zigzags, maybe X's, but like they're these linear, geometric, abstract markings, right up my alley. But I don't think we've got no evidence of Neanderthals making magnificent mammoth paintings or anything, right?
We've got hand stencils, which is so, and that's occurring in a couple of caves.
Yeah.
But this is an enigma. I mean, I would like to think it's. I mean, it's got to be one event because you know the artist clearly there's a lovely pig there being hunted. By 3 or 4 hunters. It's part of a single narrative.
Yeah.
And so maybe the dates, the younger dates are throwing us a little bit, and that's probably the case. But I would like to think it is 52,000, and it would make sense because we've got dates of 60,000 in Australia, and it's clearly there's a movement of people moving across that particular landscape. And if you look at the sort of the climatic evidence, we've got Sunderland, which is what it's called. Sunderland, which includes Borneo, Java, Sumatra, Malaysia. It's all one big landmass. You've got a small, short channel between that and Sulawesi, which remained an island through that period. And then you've got a series of an archipelago of islands terminating with East Timor. And then we're only talking about maybe 70 kilometres between that and the then Australian mainland. So there is it's doable. It's a bit like the Bering Straits. It's a doable movement of modern humans.
Yep. Oh yeah. Well, and I think that maybe this is even a nice place to finish this little piece today. But I think what George and I have both been, we're both flagging is so much of what we've done over time has been limited by the technology we had available. And so again, previous generations of researchers have been forced to rely upon what was accessible to them. And so I feel like we're constantly expanding the story now, thanks to genetics, thanks to new dating techniques, thanks to things like Raman spectrometry. So now we have all these other analysis tools, which we just didn't have before, climatic information, all those things that, to me, I feel like the story, we're just starting to get a handle on it. And that, as George was saying with Australia, I mean, it's, to my mind, as well, it's completely logical that Homo sapiens and our cousin species around the globe were doing things much earlier than we had previously thought. And with every one of these stories, with each thing we're doing here, I feel like we're starting to fill in some of those, that kind of part of the story with the new data and the new evidence. And so I think the technology, it's coming. So we'll get there. But yeah, it's just it shouldn't be surprising. I agree with George. I think absolutely, why wouldn't they be doing it, 52,000 years ago? And I honestly think we'll just start finding more stuff like that now that we have these new dating techniques.
Absolutely. And as we've said, it's these new techniques that just keep advancing and keep bringing us along that are going to pave the way for new discoveries, new enlightenments, and really just show what's coming in the field. And that's where we're going. It's new technology. And we'll just have to see where we land, because I think Genevieve has even mentioned carbon dating. You said 45,000 years ago. Tom Hyam with the Oxford Radiocarbon Lab has gotten dates at 55,000 years. So
I've heard that. It's so exciting.
I know things keep getting pushed back and pushed back. So we never know where we're going to land. But that's also, I think, a huge problem, which is something that I want to perhaps help solve. Is we need to reanalyze all of our data, because we have new techniques, and we can't do that without artificial intelligence and machine learning, because we don't have enough humans and brain power to reanalyze everything and all this data and put it in a way that is clear and understandable, so we can actually see patterns. And that's something I think that is missing. It's been an amazing conversation so far. I know that George has some awesome books that he would like to show you, because during these episodes we're going to talk about the books, because where does learning come from if not from these wonderful pages of literature that we find? So George, why don't you show us these books that you have chosen for us today?
I will also add, Seth, that you also get your learning from podcasts like this. There we are.
Oh, well, yes, of course. How could I be so silly?
Anyway, for listeners and viewers, I get about 2 or 3 books a month to review for various magazines and journals. And the two that sort of caught my eye this month, in fact, both Genevieve and myself have had an involvement in some respects. But the first book is called Advances in UAE Archaeology. That's United Arab Emirates. So we're looking at the Arabian Peninsula, and it's the Eastern Arabian Peninsula. And this is a book about the proceedings of an archaeology conference in Dubai in 2022. I've reviewed it. It's quite a hefty book. It's hardback. And again, for those of you interested in this, I will send to Seth the covers of the book and all the details that you need to know about them. And it's beautifully produced. The only thing that's missing from it really is a good opening contextual chapter, and I'm surprised they didn't do it. But it's 20 chapters which cover the Middle Paleolithic right through to the early Islamic period. So it's older than me. So it's a good read. It's technical. It's got a lot of really new ideas in new technologies being used in archaeological evidence. I was quite surprised and happy to see a lot of, it's about 6-7 papers that were devoted to Al Ain, which is where Genevieve and I were based when we were doing our project at Jebel Hafid and Qurn bin Said. So, a very interesting book, right riveting read. Again, just a few things, a little bit dry, but nonetheless, it's well worth a read for those people who are interested in that part of the world. Still sticking with that part of the world, but a far more, I think, in my view, interesting read is the book by Kimberly Williams. It's called Landscapes of Death, Early Bronze Age Tombs and Mortuary Rituals on the Oman Peninsula, which basically covers Oman and a little bit of the UAE on the eastern side, which is the Straits of Hormuz, Al Ain, etc., etc., and it actually covers the Halfet tomb assemblage or culture that we see around our feet. And she's done an absolutely fantastic job, beautifully illustrated. I mean, you know, when a cover sells a book, well, you look at this cover and you want to buy it. It's just a lovely book. It's been beautifully produced by Archaeological Press in Oxford. In it, it covers everything about mortuary practices in the Bronze Age and a little bit of the early Iron Age. These perfect tombs, by the way, a lot of them are just piles of stone, but there have been some really good sympathetic reconstructions. And she covers nearly all the areas where these tombs are being found. They've all got different special names based on type sites, but basically they're circular monuments. Some are empty in terms of internal space, but as we move through the Bronze Age, they start to get more elaborate. So you get little sort of compartments and rooms within these circular Bronze Age monuments. They actually look like kilns, but they're not. They're used for burying the dead. But that was a book that's really sort of caught my eye because of the cover. And then when I opened it, there was just lots and lots of really good illustrations, lots of good text. And easy, really, actually, it's a book you want to carry with you if you're walking around Oman or the eastern side of the UAE. So, yeah, two very, very good books to get hold of for this podcast.
Very nice, very nice. And always we will look forward to hearing about your book reviews and any other reviews that we may have. And now, guys, I think we're going to start to wrap things up for this podcast, this very first episode of season 3 of the Paleo Post Podcast. You know, we could not be here without the support of our audience, of our listeners, of our subscribers like you. And I know it's cheesy and I know it's stupid, but guys, we really need you to subscribe and to like and to share this podcast, because if we want to share our goal, which is to spread education on human origins so that we all have a better shared understanding of our past, which leads to a better and more equal and equitable future, we need people to understand where we come from. And that comes from learning, that comes from understanding where we come from, and that is something that you can only get from listening to podcasts like this, reading books, reading articles, joining groups that allow you to express yourself. And this podcast, every person you share this to, that is one more person that can learn about human origins, and that is something that we need. So please like, share, and subscribe. And the next episode is going to be extra exciting. I'm going to let Genevieve talk a little bit about that. And I just look forward so much to seeing you guys this season. It's going to be a blast. We're going to put a lot of extra work into this season to impress you guys, and just smash that subscribe button if you like what we're doing. Genevieve, I'll hand it off to you.
Yay! I was going to say, well, first of all, what we need. You got to subscribe to the Paleo Tribe.
Ooh, yeah. That's okay, guys.
Awesome.
You're now the Paleo Tribe. You are now all on part of the Paleo Tribe. So anyone who has subscribed is the Paleo Tribe.
So if you want to be part of our tribe, you have to come be part of our tribe. Yeah, right? So no, absolutely.
All the cool
Put it
kids are.
far and wide. Oh my gosh, and wide rhymes too. There you go. See, we could just start making horrible rhymes up. I also I have a really cute picture of George and I from the UAE when we were at Alliance, so I'll make sure I send that to Seth so he can put that little photo of us up there.
Absolutely.
Yes, no, I mean, I'm so excited to be back, and there's always so much to talk about, and it's such I love the combination of George and Seth and I think it's a really good mix of people and backgrounds and knowledge areas. And yes, I'm starting finally this long visioned project I've had regarding my global level database. I'm finally actually starting a brand new build, brand new program, all new code. It's going to be magnificent, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more next time. So I'll leave you with that teaser here, but this is a dream I've been thinking about for over a decade. So it's so exciting to finally start seeing it come to life, and I can't wait to share that as part of the journey, because you guys will be hanging out with me all the time, so you'll get to hear about it. So that's it for me for now, and we will see you in the next episode. And now we've come up with our subscribe to the Paleo Tribe, so there we go.
Exactly. And
George has a final
Yes.
say, right?
George, anything you would like to end us with?
I will say, this is my Uncle Sam bit. Bribe to subscribe to the Paleo Tribe.
Oh,
It continues. It continues.
we're on a roll now. It's going to happen every time. It'll be fun.
All right, guys, this was an absolute blast and a fun way to start the season. We will see you all on the next episode where we are going to have a wonderful discussion on AI, machine learning, science communication, human origins, the news, and of course, actually, forgot to mention, we will be accepting questions for answers for our next episode. So I will be making a post, and you guys can leave comments or email us, and we will do a little Q&A section where you guys can post some questions, and we'll do some shout-outs. So that'll be pretty cool. So if you want to be shout-out or have a shout-out of your name, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment, and we'll answer your questions. And with that, guys, I think we are signing off. This is goodbye from Seth.
Goodbye from Genevieve.
From me, George.
All right, everyone. Goodbye, Paleo Tribe. We'll see you next time.